This town ain't a battlefield, Granger. But keep talking, and you'll vanish like the last guy who couldn't shut up. That's what Deputy Cade told Elias the night before things unraveled. But here's the thing. Elias had been quiet. For years. A ghost in a shed, with only his dog and the weight of war for company. Until Boone, his dog, dug up something in the woods. Rust. Blood. A secret not meant to resurface. And when the tape played in that crowded town hall, silence finally broke. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Elias Granger rose before dawn, the same way he had for nearly a decade. Damp air hung in the old shed, laced with the earthy scent of wet leaves and old wood. He sat up slowly, letting the weight in his chest settle before his feet met the cold floor. The kettle waited in its usual spot, its dented flank leaning against the rusted burner. He filled it from the jug, struck a match, and let the quiet crackle of flame fill the space. Outside, a light wind teased the pines. Boone paced the fenced edge of the clearing, his paws soft on the mud. The dog moved with purpose but without haste, like a soldier on patrol. Elias tracked him for a while, barefoot on the porch, arms folded across his chest. The porch boards voiced a tired complaint under his weight. The trees beyond the clearing stood tall and shadowed, their trunks black with morning mist. A scrap of paper fluttered near the steps. He stooped to pick it up. Rain had soaked the flyer, smearing the ink. Community meeting, Saturday, East Hollow First Church. No name attached. No envelope. No surprise. The list of residents printed below didn't include his. It never did. He crumpled the paper and stuffed it in the stove with yesterday's kindling. Afterward, Elias headed down to the general store, gravel popping under his boots. The road cut through a shallow dip in the land, winding past dry grass and mailboxes that hadn't seen letters in weeks. Boone followed close, sniffing at ditches and fence posts. At the storefront, the bell above the door gave a dry little ring. Elias asked for lamp oil and dog feed. Mar didn't look up right away. When he did, he rubbed a spot on the counter with the heel of his palm. Still got that tab, he muttered. I pay cash. Marv sighed, like that made it harder. Sorry, store policy. Elias let it go and stepped out, Boone sliding into stride beside him. Halfway home, Boone stopped cold, ears forward, nose twitching. A low bark escaped him, then another, without warning. Boone streaked toward the trees. Boone! Elias sprinted after him, heart pounding as he crashed through brush and hanging limbs. He found Boone crouched beside a shallow hole, teeth bared but no longer barking. Elias knelt. Something glinted beneath the leaves, metal, dark with rust. He swept back the soil. A cylinder. Cold, heavy. His fingers cinched around the cold cylinder. Something buzzed deep in his ribs, and a bell tolled faintly in the distance. The bell tolled faintly, rolling through the trees until it found Elias's ears. By the time he reached the edge of town, the church pews were nearly full. Deputy Warren Cade stood at the front, waiting for quiet. Beneath the arch beams, the lights buzzed faintly, casting a yellowed hue across folded hands and furrowed brows. Someone had laid out lemon bars and paper cups of cider near the vestibule, untouched. Cade strolled to the lectern, not in uniform but dressed sharp, pressed slacks, checked shirt, leather boots that creaked faintly with each stride. His badge wasn't pinned but rested in his back pocket, visible when he turned. "We've had a couple incidents," he said, with a measured smile that left his eyes unchanged. "Nothing serious. Not yet, but folks are nervous. They hear things at night. Movement in the woods. Dogs barking past midnight. One woman said she saw someone standing by her fence line." A low susurrus rolled across the pews. A few heads turned. A woman near the front crossed her arms, nodding. "I think it's fair," Cade continued, "to take a closer look at who's actually living in East Hollow, who's contributing, who's part of the fabric, and who's, well, just here, hanging on." There was no need to say a name. Outside, across the gravel lot in the parsonage's cold shadow, Elias braced his back against a brick. From where he stood, he could just see through the narrow stained glass window. Shapes moved inside, Hands gesturing, shoulders shifting, heads nodding in rhythm to a song he wasn't invited to sing. Boone sat beside him, ears high, tail still. The dog made no sound, but his gaze tracked movement across the parking lot like a sentry. Elias stayed long enough to watch Cade step down, shaking hands with familiar faces. Mr. Rollins from the gas station, the Pearson sisters, even Marv from the store. Cade said something that made them all laugh. Elias turned and walked home. Back in the old shed, he set the rusted find on the workbench, under the single overhead bulb. The casing looked older than it had earlier. A scratch ran along the side, and beneath it, engraved numbers, not the usual caliber stamp. He fished a magnifying glass in the drawer and tilted the metal toward the light. A series, 14K, LR72-09. He mouthed the letters silently. Government issue, not standard, and definitely not something a hunter would drop in the woods. He flipped open a worn notebook, one of many stacked in a dented tin box beneath the bed. His fingers smudged the graphite as he scribbled. Try to recall where he'd seen a similar code. It tugged at something, a memory just out of reach, like a shape behind frosted glass. Near midnight, Boone began worrying at the door. Not frantic, just persistent. Elias opened it, flashlight in hand. The air outside had thickened, colder now, with the sharp scent of sap and something else. Something burnt. Boone led him toward the edge of the clearing, nose to the ground. He stopped by a half-buried shape, paws working quickly. Elias crouched beside him, brushing leaves aside to reveal a torn strip of heavy canvas. Stained dark at the edges, one corner singed. He raised it to his face. Diesel clung to the fibers, threaded with ash and earth. A military tarp, no doubt, the kind used to cover weapons crates or transport equipment. He ran his fingers along the fibers, still damp, recently exposed. Boone let out a low, cautious growl, staring past the trees. Elias followed his gaze. A single beam of light swept between the trunks, not bright, but deliberate. No headlights, no engine rumble. Just a hush, followed by the crunch of slow tires over loose stone. The beam caught Boone's collar for a second before vanishing deeper into the trees. Elias moved back toward the old shed, every muscle drawn tight. He didn't need to see plates to know the vehicle didn't belong to anyone from around here. It wasn't the kind of car you parked outside a grocery store. From the shadows, he tracked the beam's fade and listened for footsteps that never arrived. Boone pressed against his leg. Still silent, still watching, and in that hush, Elias turned toward the far ridge, where an old garage slumped behind the cemetery fence, and the gravel remembered every tire. The East Hollow Public Library sat between a shuttered bakery and a hardware store that hadn't restocked since Memorial Day. It used to be a chapel. Elias noticed the stained glass in the back, faded depictions of saints with outstretched palms now overlooking shelves of government documents and water-stained maps. He stepped inside, and the bell above the door jingled, sharp in the quiet. The warmth hit him first. Dry, dust-scented, laced with something faintly floral. Boone stayed tied outside. Not everyone welcomed the dog, no matter how quiet. Behind the main desk sat a woman, hunched over a stack of local tax registries. Her hair was pulled into a soft, silver knot at the base of her neck, and she wore a cardigan the color of dead leaves. She kept her eyes on the registries a heartbeat longer. "Help you find something?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "I need old military logs," Elias replied, his tone dropping lower than he meant. Now she looked up, gray eyes, steady, thoughtful. She studied his face a beat longer than most would. "What kind?" "Armory inventory. Serial tracking. Anything tied to East Hollow Reserve." She paused mid-motion, fingers resting on the box lid. Then, without comment, she stood and disappeared down a side aisle. He followed, footsteps muffled against the fraying carpet. She stopped beside a row of boxes labeled in handwriting too neat to be recent. "You a vet?" she ventured, not unkind. He didn't answer. She didn't push. Just opened the third box, rifled through folders, and pulled one stamped. Restricted. East Hollow MR, 2009 to 2010. She set it on a table and nodded toward the chairs. You can take a look. Just don't remove anything. He sat. She returned to her desk. He scanned quickly, columns of code swimming past. Most of it meant little. A list of crates, vehicle rotations, inventory numbers. Then he saw it. The same prefix, 14KLR, matched to a shipment marked confidential transit to auxiliary route 3. Location, perimeter south. The same direction Boone had bolted into days ago. As he turned the page, a tremor passed through his hand. The paper slipped. His breath caught, shallow and quick. The fluorescent light above flickered. Across the room, the woman rose, walked to a nearby cabinet, and slid a manila envelope onto the table. She didn't say anything, just tapped twice before walking away. Inside was a copy of an old topographic map. Edges torn, routes drawn in faded ink. A red marker circled a clearing near the tree line south of the old garage, right where Elias had found the tarp. He stared at it longer than he needed to. Name's Marla, she said when he brought the folder back. Kenner. He nodded, kept his voice steady. Thanks. You live out past Hemlock? His eyes narrowed. Why? No reason, she said, though her tone shifted. Just careful where you dig. East Hollow has long memory, short patience. He stepped back into wind, that bit harder than before. Boone greeted him with a wag and a low huff. They cut back through the woods, sticking to the trail. A man waited by the edge of the clearing, standing half in shadow. Elias didn't recognize him. Older, maybe mid-50s, wearing a camo jacket and scuffed boots. He didn't speak right away. You're the one in the shed, the man finally drawled. His voice was dry, casual, like they'd run into each other at the diner. Elias said nothing. The man took a slow step forward. Might want to watch where you're poking. Folks round here don't like surprises. Boone bristled, a low growl rising in his throat. Elias stared, didn't move. The man adjusted his ball cap, nodded like that was the end of it, and disappeared into the trees. Night settled, and the old shed seemed colder. Elias didn't light the stove. He sat in the corner with the old rifle across his lap, barrel clean, but unused. Boone lay near the door, ears twitching at every creak. Sometime after midnight, Elias jolted upright from a dream he couldn't fully recall. Smoke, screams, sand underfoot. His shirt clung to his back. He reached for the water jug, paused. Boone stood at the door again, hackles raised, eyes fixed on nothing. Elias cocked a rifle and rose slowly. Outside, the forest didn't move. Then a snapping twig cracked to the quiet, sharp, deliberate, close enough to push him toward the door. The twig's crack still echoed when Boone began pacing at the door, nails clicking against the floorboards. He glanced back at Elias with growing urgency. Elias pulled on his coat, without speaking, and slipped into the dark. Flashlight angled low, the beam sweeping across mud-slick leaves and moss-covered roots. Boone darted ahead, stopping to sniff, then veered east toward the long-abandoned church crouched near the bend. Elias moved slower, knees stiff, breath puffing white in the cold. The trees opened just enough to reveal the stone steeple, cracked at its peak. The place had long since been stripped of anything sacred, but something still moved inside it. Elias crouched behind a rusted swing set across the lot. A pickup truck idled beside the building, its back gate open. A figure stepped from the cab, broad shoulders, confident stride. The orange light above the side door lit up his profile. Deputy Warren Cade. Elias tightened as Cade hefted a crate from the truck bed and disappeared through the cellar door at the side of the church. No hesitation. No need to check if anyone saw. He wasn't hiding, because no one else was supposed to be watching. A second figure emerged from inside, thinner, in a hooded jacket, wearing gloves. They exchanged no words. The crate vanished into the dark below the floorboards. Boone shifted beside Elias, then barked, just once. The sound cracked the quiet like glass. Cade spun, eyes cutting toward the trees. Boone lunged forward. Elias grabbed the dog's collar just in time and pulled him hard, dragging them both deeper into the brush. He held his breath until the truck door slammed and tires churned the gravel behind them. When they reached the old shed, Elias was sweating despite the cold. His hand shook as he locked the door. Boone curled up beneath the window, watching the tree line. Elias didn't sleep. At first light, he stood at the library counter, tapping his fingers against a folded slip of paper. Marla took it without a word, unfolded it, and studied a handwritten license plate. She considered the numbers. "That's a city vehicle," she murmured. "Assigned to the sheriff's department." Elias swallowed hard, chest tightening. He leaned on the counter to steady himself. Marla tilted her head. "Come with me?" Her house was 4 blocks off Main, tucked behind a pair of pine trees that hadn't been trimmed in years. The porch sagged in the middle. Inside, it smelled faintly of old newsprint and lemon furniture polish. "Sit," she murmured, gesturing to a floral armchair with worn arms. She put water on the stove and busied herself with finding a tin of ginger tea. Elias stayed standing for a long moment before lowering himself into the chair. Boone settled on the rug without protest. The walls around him were lined with shelves, books, boxes, stacks of local newspapers tied in twine. A picture frame sat by the window. A man in a brown uniform, eyes kind, arm around a much younger Marla. She handed Elias a mug, then sat across from him in silence. He stared into the steam, fingers wrapped tight around the ceramic. "I knew," she said finally, "that something didn't smell right. I just didn't expect it to come back this way." He didn't answer. Couldn't. His pulse thudded in his throat. "You were infantry?" she asked softly. He nodded. "My husband was embedded press. Iraq. 2006. Died in Ramadi." She paused. There were stories he couldn't print. Said some truths need time before anyone will listen. From the end table came a small, dust-covered recorder, military issue, scarred on the side. Marla sat on the armrest beside Elias and clicked it on. The click echoed between them. She left it running and rose to clear the kettle. Elias stared at the blinking red light, his reflection warped in the plastic casing. He didn't reach for it. Outside, wind brushed the windows. Boone twitched in his sleep, ears flicking, nose flaring like he smelled smoke that wasn't yet there. Morning came brittle and clear. By the time Elias reached the market square, hand-painted signs flapped in the breeze, and folding tables bowed beneath late autumn produce. Children wove between booths, laughing with sticky fingers and half-eaten candy apples. A bluegrass trio strummed near the gazebo. It smelled like kettle corn, hay, and wet leaves. Elias threaded through the crowd with Boone at his heel, a canvas satchel slung over one shoulder. He kept to the edges, avoiding eye contact, though he caught fragments of conversations as he passed. Most didn't lower their voices. Thought he left town years ago. Lives out by the trees, behind the cemetery. Never see him at church. He stopped at a stall selling flashlights, leaned down to examine the cheaper models. The vendor, a boy barely 20, shifted his weight and said nothing. Elias pulled out a 20. "No batteries included," the boy muttered, eyes skimming past him. Elias nodded once and dropped the cash. As he angled toward the first aid tent, a small hand tugged at a sleeve just ahead of him. A boy with a crooked smile pointed. "Mom, is that him? The one from the war?" The woman turned. Her gaze landed on Elias, narrowed. She pulled the child close. "Don't point," she snapped then louder, "and don't go near him. That man killed people in the desert." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Silence came anyway. Elias kept his face blank. His grip tightened on the strap across his shoulder, and he pushed on. Boone pressed closer, every hair along his spine raised. They reached the edge of the square without buying the kit. A cruiser idled at the curb. Cade leaned against the driver's side, arms crossed, sunglasses gleaming in the pale sun. He straightened as Elias approached. "Morning," he offered, voice honeyed thin. Elias kept walking. "You got a minute?" Cade asked. Wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Elias didn't stop, but Boone did. The dog's stance shifted, guarding. Cade smiled faintly. "It's about city property. Somebody broke into the basement at the old church." That made Elias pause. "Maybe just kids," Cade continued. "But then, someone else saw a man in the woods. Dog with him." The way he said dog made the air sharper. Come on down to the station, he added, motioning toward the open car door. Let's talk it out. He gave no answer and fell in step. At the station, the air inside hummed from the ceiling vent. The place had been remodeled, but only halfway. Old linoleum met newer tile, and one flickering light above the front desk made everything look sallow. They settled in a narrow room with bare walls. Cade poured 2 cups of coffee from a scuffed thermos. Elias didn't touch his. I'm not accusing you, Cade said easily. I just think maybe you saw something. Maybe we're out for a walk. Military types like to keep habits, right? Elias fixed him with a flat look. Cade leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table. I heard about your record. You were in Fallujah, weren't you? No response. Cade tilted his head, eyes narrowing just slightly. You were discharged with commendations. But I also heard there was an incident. Friendly fire. Civilian casualties. Hard to shake something like that, huh? Elias's hand stayed flat on the table. His jaw twitched. Look, Cade said, voice dipping low. This town? It's peaceful. Quiet. We want to keep it that way. But you start sniffing around where you shouldn't, people get nervous. A pause. This isn't a war zone, Granger. Out here, the quiet ones live longest. Elias stood. Cade didn't stop him. Outside, the wind had picked up. A woman glanced over her shoulder as he passed, pulling her coat tighter. A boy dropped his ice cream, eyes wide. When Elias reached the old shed, his shoulders ached. Boone trotted ahead, circled back, then settled on the porch. Elias didn't go inside. He sat under the overhang, resting against the siding, one boot toe tracing the grain of the floorboard. Boone came close, pressed his head into Elias's knee. Elias lowered his gaze, touched the dogs for like an apology that wouldn't form in words. Something rattled behind the tree lean. Just wind, maybe. But Elias didn't look up. Boone did. He stayed perfectly still. The path behind the cemetery wound through a tangle of undergrowth and half-buried gravestones, forgotten by anyone who didn't already know it was there. Elias hadn't walked it in years, not since the last funeral that mattered. Boone trotted ahead, nose down, tail held high, moving with intention. Something had caught his scent, and he wasn't letting it go. The air was thick with the scent of rotting leaves and damp wood. Somewhere nearby, a squirrel skittered across a fallen branch, but Boone didn't flinch. He veered sharply to the right, cutting through a tear in the old fence and into a clearing choked with weeds. At the far end stood a sagging structure of corrugated metal and weather-warped beams. The garage. Once it had been a working shop, a place where men fixed trucks and swapped stories while chewing on toothpicks and spitting in the dirt. Now, it leaned as if trying to lie down and be forgotten. The sign above the entrance still read Griffin and Sons. Transmission repair, though the letters were sun-bleached to ghosts. Elias slipped inside, brushing past a hanging strand of ivy. Shafts of light speared through holes in the roof, sketching dusty angles across the room. The place smelled of mildew and rusted oil cans. A cracked creeper lay overturned beside a rusted workbench, and glass littered the floor beneath a broken window pane. Boone ghosted through the debris until he stopped near the back wall, where a stack of dry-rotted tires leaned against a dented filing cabinet. His paws scraped the concrete as he began digging. Not frantically, but with a sense of focus, like he already knew what he was looking for. Elias knelt beside him, brushed aside a tire, and saw it. A tin box, army green once, now flecked with rust. The lid bore no markings. He lifted it carefully, feeling the weight shift inside. He levered the clasp with his knife and worked the lid free. The inside smelled faintly of old tobacco and motor oil. Nestled in a strip of canvas were 3 items: a torn section of spiral-bound notebook, a folded piece of paper with rough lines drawn in pencil, and a military ID card sealed in a cracked plastic sleeve. He lifted the notebook first. The writing was uneven, some of the ink blurred by time or moisture. Still, a few words left on the page, stark in their urgency. October 12th. They're moving crates without documentation. Serial numbers filed under old tags. Nothing traceable. Cade told me to keep my mouth shut, or I'd disappear like Miller did. I don't think he was bluffing. If I don't show up to formation Monday, something happened. This isn't supply chain work. These are weapons. Wrong kind. If someone finds this, tell my brother. Tell the truth. The signature at the bottom was smeared, but the name written on the ID card made it clear. Holt Travis C., Technical Specialist, East Hollow Military Reserve. Elias sat back on his heels, breath steadying in the cold air. The name stirred something. A missing person's notice. Maybe. Faded photo on a flyer posted years ago near the hardware store. Disappearance during the base's shutdown. Quietly dismissed. No body. No search beyond the first week. The map sketched in pencil showed the perimeter of the old reserve. A crude X had been drawn near a landmark Elias recognized. The collapsed water tower just east of the Treeline. The same direction where Boone had pulled him weeks earlier. The same stretch of woods where the air always seemed too still. He examined the ID card. The corners had curled, and a crack split through the middle of Holt's photo, but the man's eyes were sharp, as if he'd known what kind of danger his words might carry. Elias closed the tin, wrapped in the canvas, and slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket. Boone stood watching him, tail low, body still. They made the walk home without a word. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of burned wood and distant diesel. The old shed appeared through the trees like a bruise on the hillside, familiar, but not safe. Inside, Elias didn't remove his coat. He pulled the old ammunition box from beneath his cot and opened the rusted latch. Inside lay a few artifacts. Dog tags not his own, a folded flag, a photo of a squad from a desert morning long gone. He added Holt's ID to the pile, set the notebook beside it. His fingers lingered on the map before folding it smaller, tighter, and sliding it beneath the mattress. A gust shouldered the door on its hinges, and he left it unlatched. Boone curled near the threshold, ears twitching, one eye half open. Elias stayed in the dark, listening to the roof tick as the first drops of rain began to fall. The ticking turned to a hammering as rain pounded the metal roof, a steady racket that grew and grew. Inside, humid air clung to the room, carrying the smell of wet wood and the older tang of rust and creeping mold. Elias hunched in the single armchair, the torn pages from Holt's notebook spread across his lap. The ink, smudged in places, held his gaze like a wound that wouldn't close. Boone sprawled by the door, chin on his paws, ears flicking now and then. He never truly drifted off. Each gust of wind or creak of timber made him lift his head, nose testing the air. Elias tracked the same paragraph of the fifth pass, a soundless murmur shaping his mouth. If someone finds this, tell my brother. Tell the truth. A branch snapped outside, close, clean, deliberate. Boone rose in an instant, growling low. Elias rose, snatched a flashlight, and fished a rifle from under the bed, a piece he hadn't fired in over a year. The old bolt-action creaked as he chambered around. Rain lashed the windows now, hard enough to blur the outlines of the trees beyond. He opened the door slowly. Boone bolted into the darkness without hesitation, paused silent on wet earth. Elias followed, boots sinking slightly into the mud. Out back, the beam snagged a blur, too quick to place, but at the Treeline the space stood empty. He found footprints, deep and fresh, wider than his boots and deliberate enough to rule out a hunter. He swept the trees with the light, pulse racing, then dropped his gaze again. One set of prints. Someone had been watching the old shed. He didn't go back inside. Instead, he turned toward the forest, letting Boone lead, moving without sound, without decision. Only instinct. Branches clawed at his jacket. Wet leaves slapped his cheeks. The storm thickened as they approached the slope behind the cemetery, and beyond that, the old church. The building stood crooked in the downpour, its steeple like a splinter pointing at the sky. One side of the roof had caved in years ago, but the cellar beneath remained solid, hidden beneath a warped trapdoor behind the altar. Elias crept around back, flashlight off now, only the memory of where to step guiding his feet. He pried the door open, hinges protesting softly. The smell hit first, metal, oil, something chemical, but faint, mixed with old mildew and wet earth. He descended. The flashlight beam bounced off concrete walls and rows of stacked wooden crates. The symbol on the side matched the one etched into Holt's bullet casing, 3 interlocking arrows inside a circle. not standard military. Not anything he recognized from his service. He moved closer. Some of the crates were marked. Internal use only U.S. Army. Others had no labels at all. Black duck seals crossed over the lids. Elias reached out to touch one when footsteps echoed above. He killed the beam and slid into the shadows behind a rusted boiler. Wood groaned. The stairwell creaked. He held his breath. Voices, muffled but close, drifted down. Don't want this one delayed. It needs to be over the border before the 18th. A second man, deeper voice. We're pushing it. Roads are watched now. Then Cade's voice, oily and familiar. That's your concern. Mine is keeping the town quiet. We got a nosy old vet sniffing too close again. If he opens his mouth, I know how to close it. The room seemed to press inward. Elias cinched his grip on the stock, yet his legs locked stiff. The sweat on his neck chilled. He didn't wait to hear more. As they moved toward the crates, he slipped out the way he came, into the rain-slicked dark, boots splashing in puddles that had no bottom. Back beneath the trees, far from East Hollow's glow, Elias sank to his knees. His breath caught in his throat, heart galloping. The forest swayed around him, blurred by rain. He lifted the gun and set the cold steel against his brow. A single, shaking second. A voice stirred, not Cade's, not his own. Something deeper, quieter. This is not Afghanistan. You're home, or what's left of it. His hand quivered. The rain intensified, and when he lowered the rifle, water streamed into his eyes, leaving him blind to everything but the dark. When the rain finally broke, Elias found himself beneath the fluorescent hum of the archive room, the pale buzz pressing at his temples. He sat at the wooden table, fingers tight around a mug of black coffee Marla had insisted on pouring. The steam curled slowly, barely rising in the cold air. Across from him, Marla cracked open a battered cardboard file box labeled East Hollow Gazette, 2015. Her hands moved with practiced grace, worn fingers separating newsprint like old leaves. Elias watched silent, until she paused at a folded page and slid it across. Here, she murmured. It was a grainy photo, taken during the supposed decommissioning of the East Hollow Military Reserve. Soldiers stood in a long line, some loading crates into flatbed trucks. In the bottom right corner, half obscured by motion blur, was a figure bent over a large wooden box. Elias leaned in. A single heavy thud shook his chest. The man's face was only partially visible, but the posture, the broad shoulders, the patch on the sleeve, it all lined up. Travis Holt, not a ghost or a file number, but a real living man, carrying something heavy in the final days of the base's operation. And just behind him, near the edge of the frame, stood someone else. Marla tapped the margin with an unsteady finger. There, him. Elias squinted. The resolution was poor, but he knew the line of that jaw, the way the man stood, like he didn't belong in the photograph but wasn't afraid of being in it. Cade. Back then, not a deputy. Just another enlisted man in charge of internal security detail. Marla held her tongue and let the hush sit between them, brittle and humming. Elias let out a slow breath. So Cade was there, when Holt was still alive. She gave a single nod, her mouth pressed in. And if Holt disappeared not long after this photo was taken, then Cade may have been the last person to see him, Marla finished. The thought lingered in the stale air. No thunderclap, no grand revelation, just a slow, seeping realization that the walls were closer than they had thought. Elias looked at her, studying the lines around her mouth, the tired corners of her eyes. She had known too many things for too long. He almost whispered it. Why are you helping me? Marla stood, walking to the back room. Because once, a long time ago, I believed people would listen when you told the truth. She opened a drawer, rummaged through layers of dust-covered folders, and returned with something wrapped in a piece of blue cloth. She unwrapped it with care, a military-issue field recorder, old but well-kept. The dials were worn. One corner was dented, the kind used in field interviews, tactical briefings, or sometimes final confessions. My husband brought this back from Iraq. He was a translator. Said it was safer to keep your memories in magnets than your mouth. Before he died, he told me, Always record what they want to erase. She placed it gently in Elias's hands. He didn't speak. The weight of the recorder was heavier than it should have been, as if it carried echoes of someone else's life. He traced the edge with his thumb. Outside, the wind pushed softly against the library's windows. A dry leaf scraped across the glass like a fingernail. Elias finally nodded. You think Cade knew Holt recorded something? I think he suspected. And if Cade is moving crates out again now, he's not cleaning up old messes. He's repeating them. The room drew tight. Elias rose and tucked the recorder inside his coat. Marla followed him to the door. You'll need someone to back you up. But don't ask me to be loud. I won't. I don't survive that way. He gave her a look, half gratitude, half warning, and walked out. The clouds were breaking apart above East Hollow. Patches of pale blue skies surfaced between the gray. Boone sat in the truck bed, his tail giving one solid thump as Elias approached. The glove box creaked open as Elias retrieved the snapshot. He stared again at Holt's shadowed face. Then his eyes drifted to background. Cade's gaze caught mid-frame, directed not to camera, but seemingly at Holt. A stare not of camaraderie, but of calculation. Elias flipped the photo, tapped the corner thoughtfully, then turned the key in the ignition. As the engine stirred to life, a sudden gust swept across the road, flinging a handful of leaves into the windshield like startled birds. He didn't flinch. Behind him, inside the library, Marla closed the door and pulled the blinds halfway down. She watched Elias drive off before returning to the archive room, flipping off the light, leaving only the recorder's reflection glowing faintly beneath the table lamp. Elias went sleepless at the small table by the window, the metal box fixed before him like an unblinking eye. Rain came and went, hissing against the roof, then receding to quiet. Boone curled beneath the table, eyes open and alert. Every so often, the dog lifted his head and watched Elias, as if sensing that whatever came next would change everything. The box was worn smooth at the corners, its lid dented from time. Inside lay the identity card of Travis Holt, the grainy newspaper photo, the torn map marked in red, and finally, the compact field recorder Marla had entrusted to him. Elias had copied the audio from the night in the church basement. Every word Cade had spoken, every name mentioned. He spliced it with fragments from Holt's journal. It wasn't polished, but it didn't need to be. At dawn, Elias lifted the lid of the cedar chest tucked behind the stove. From it, he pulled out the dress uniform he hadn't worn in 7 years. Olive drab, still holding the faint scent of camphor and tobacco. He laid it flat on the bed and fastened each cuff with deliberate care. The brass insignia caught the first light through the window. Boone sat at the doorway, watching, his tail still. Outside, the town of East Hollow stirred. Trucks rolled down gravel roads. Kids chased each other across yards. It could have been any morning, but not for him. By the time he reached the town hall, people were already gathering. The building loomed low and squat, wrapped in faded bunting from a 4th of July long past. The community hall inside had been set up with rows of folding chairs and a table at the front where the mayor and a few deputies sat. Cade stood among them, dressed in uniform, sleeves pressed, smile sharp. Good to see such a strong turnout, Cade said as he took the microphone. We live in uncertain times. That's no secret, but it's our unity that keeps East Hollow safe, protected, untouched. A low ripple of approval moved through the room. Some nodded. Others glanced over their shoulders. But unity, Cade continued, requires trust. It requires removing elements that sow confusion, people who bring chaos instead of community. He left Elias unnamed, and everyone understood. Elias walked in without a word. The wooden door swung, and the room turned. Some eyes widened, others narrowed. His boots echoed softly on the linoleum floor as he made his way to the front. He carried the iron box with both hands, his posture rigid, face unreadable. Cade's voice faltered. Mr. Granger, I'm not sure. Elias placed the box on the table. The crowd held still. He flipped the latch. The lid opened with a quiet click. From within, he retrieved the recorder. His thumb brushed the play button. A low crackle rose, and then Cade's voice filled the room. If he's alive, it all unravels. Don't let him speak. I'll take care of it. Like the last time. Gasps. Someone stood in the back. Another person dropped their water bottle. Cade stepped forward. That could be anyone's voice. Elias reached back into the box, pulled out the ID card, then the photograph, then the map. One by one, he laid them out like cards in a losing hand. The mayor leaned forward. What is this? Elias didn't speak. Boone barked once. Short, precise. Someone in the front row whispered, That's the missing soldier, the one from the old base. Cade's smile was gone. His hand twitched toward his belt. Elias's gaze dropped just enough to notice. His own hand stayed calmly at his side. The air snapped taut, a wire drawn to breaking. Then someone spoke from the back. Is this real? Marla's voice carried, calm but firm. It's all real. I can vouch for that recording. I've heard it. That photo? I printed it myself. From the archives. Cade took a step back. Boone's nails clicked as he moved forward slightly, muscles tensed. The mayor cleared his throat, visibly rattled. Deputy Cade, I think it's best we continue this in private. For now. Elias still hadn't said a word. He turned, his uniform catching the light, and walked down the center aisle. Eyes followed, no longer with suspicion, but something else. Behind him, Cade stood frozen, a man who'd miscalculated silence. The breeze outside lifted the edge of the flag, and the murmurs swelled. Questions rising, sharper now, no longer gossip. The murmurs sharpened into low talk that cut through the hall. A dozen pairs of eyes swung toward Deputy Cade. He remained at the front, unmoving, but something had cracked his posture. His shoulders no longer squared, the lines around his mouth twitching. He let out a thin, brittle laugh. Come on now, he said, raising both hands like a magician caught mid-trick. Anyone with a tape recorder can stitch together some nonsense and call it truth. The room offered nothing back. From the second row, an elderly man levered himself upright on a duct-tape cane. His voice came out creaky but unwavering. I knew Travis Holt. We served one winter shift together at the gate. A week before he disappeared, he said, If anything happens to me, ask Cade. That's what he said. More low voices rose at once. Someone whispered. He was there. The day Holt vanished. Another voice sharper. He knew. All these years, he knew. Cade's face collapsed inward, eyes flicking toward the exits. Scanning the room not for allies, but for escape. He stepped back, nearly tripping over the corner of the table, then righted himself, jaw tightening. I'm not doing this circus, he muttered. Not here. He pivoted and strode out. No one followed. Not even the mayor. That night, Elias sat on the edge of his cot, still in uniform. Boone paced by the door, ears twitching with every creak of the forest beyond. His phone buzzed once, a nameless, unsigned summons. Meet me, man to man. Church lot, 1 hour. Boone trailed Elias into the night without a sound. The town lay hushed beneath clouds that had not yet made up their minds whether to rain. The old church appeared as a shadow stitched into the hills, sagging at the edges but standing. Cade waited beneath the broken steeple, hands in his coat pockets, face washed in the gray spill of a lone lamppost. You came, Cade said, voice low. Elias stopped several feet away, Boone keeping pace at his side. You called. Cade kicked at a stone. You could have walked away. No one would have blamed you. Hell, they already blamed you for everything else. That was your doing, Elias said quietly. And you know it. Cade's lips thinned. I did what I had to. There were orders. Holt, he got nervous. Started threatening to go public. You know what that kind of exposure does to men like us. Elias took a step closer, eyes unreadable. I know exactly what it does. I watch better men than you eat bullets because they followed orders they didn't believe in. He let the words hang between them. Cade's hand shifted, but didn't reach for a weapon. You think they'll arrest me? That this little theater of yours ends with cuffs and court dates? They already have the files. The recordings. Marla sent them out this morning. A friend at the Charleston Press. It's in the state's hands now. Cade's breath hitched. She always hated me. No. Elias said, voice nearly a whisper. She just saw you clearly. The hum of a car engine cut through the quiet. Headlights curved into the lot. 2 state troopers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their expressions unreadable. Cade didn't run. He didn't argue. He only looked at Elias one final time, a flicker of something like pleading behind his eyes. Not for forgiveness, just acknowledgement. I was a good soldier once, Cade said. Elias didn't blink. So was Holt. The officers didn't cuff him. They didn't have to. He went between them like a man stepping off the edge of a memory. Elias remained behind. Boone stood beside him, tail still, ears pointed forward. The hush returned, thick but not heavy. The last echo of Cade's boots faded down the road. Boone shifted, his front paw tapping against a loose plank of wood. The sound carried, sharp and solitary. Tap, tap, tap. Elias looked down. The dog stared ahead, eyes calm. The same wind threaded the trees and brushed the cabin walls like a memory asking to be let in. Inside, the space had changed, not drastically, but meaningfully. The warped floorboards no longer complained underfoot. The broken latch on the window had been replaced with a brass one that clicked shut with confidence. And above the small desk near the stove hung a single photograph, framed in reclaimed wood. The image, faded at the corners but still sharp, showed 7 young men in dusty fatigues, arms slung across each other's shoulders, their expression somewhere between weariness and something close to pride. Elias had cleaned the glass that morning and straightened the frame with care. For the first time, there was no crack through Travis Holt's face. Boone napped on the porch, head on his paws, ears flicking now and then. Occasionally, his tail thumped once, twice, as if confirming the peace was real. The knock on the door wasn't urgent, just present. Marla stood there in a wool coat, hair tucked under a knitted cap, her cheeks pink from the cold. She stayed on the stoop and held out a flat envelope wrapped in brown paper. "It's from the Capitol," she said simply. Elias took it without a word. She gave him a knowing look before turning back toward her truck. No long goodbye. He pulled the paper back and unfolded the newspaper inside. The headline ran across the top in bold. Breaking the silence. Veteran exposes small-town armed scandal in East Hollow. Beneath it, a black and white photo of the church's basement. Crates half opened. Soldiers and official windbreakers dusting for prints. Elias scanned the page. No photo of him, just a passing sentence. The whistleblower, a veteran who requested anonymity, has declined public comment. He let out a short, light breath, almost amused. "Good," he murmured. The word didn't need an audience. He set the paper on the table and walked into the afternoon air. Across the dirt path, the trees loomed tall but didn't crowd him. Light poured through the bare branches, stippling the clearing in shifting gold. Boone lifted his head as Elias walked past. Together, they made their way down the hill toward the town square. A small crowd had gathered outside the church, where state investigators in navy jackets moved purposefully around the entrance. Yellow tape danced in the breeze, marking boundaries now crossed. Elias kept going. Marla stood at the edge of the group, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets, a pressed badge clipped to her collar. She nodded when she saw him, but didn't call out. One of the investigators held up a box, a rusted tin container, still damp from the earth, gloved hands passing it carefully into an evidence bag. Another voice called out, "Partial prints match Holt. Confirmed." A collective stillness spread through the crowd. Someone muttered, "So it was true." Cade wasn't there. According to the article, he'd invoked his right to counsel and refused to speak. His lawyer issued a statement requesting temporary withdrawal from all active duties to support the investigation. Seeing him no longer mattered. As Elias turned to walk back home, he caught glimpses that hadn't been there weeks ago. A shopkeeper met his gaze. A man near the bakery tipped his cap. Near the hardware store, a child knelt and gently tied a yellow ribbon around Boone's neck, patting his head before skipping off. Boone kept the ribbon on. Back at the cabin, dusk folded in gently, wrapping the trees in hues of lavender and rust. Elias kept the door unlatched, not from carelessness but by choice. He lit a single lamp and let it glow near the window. No curtains drawn. No shadows hiding behind glass. He settled on the step beside Boone, back to the rough wood, the dog's warmth seeping into his side. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called once, then fell silent. Elias didn't move. He didn't need to. Across the field, no one stood behind drawn curtains. No silhouettes hovered behind lace. No eyes tracked his movements from a cracked blind, not because no one cared, but because for once they trusted. And Elias, without words or salute, simply sat in the stillness, watching the forest breathe. Morning sun sifted to the canopy, laying amber streaks across the clearing like careful brushstrokes. Elias crouched near the front of the old shed, sleeves rolled, palms pressed into damp earth. His hands worked at an unhurried pace, more deliberate than hesitant. Soil crumbled between his fingers as he scooped a shallow hole into the cleared patch he'd worked on all week. Boone lounged nearby, chin over crossed paws, eyes half-lidded, ears tuned to the rhythm of Elias's work. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of wet bark and pine. In Elias's grasp, a young maple tree waited, roots wrapped in burlap, branches sparse, leaves still pale with youth. The boy who once called him a monster handed it to him 2 days ago without looking up. No speech, no apology, just a tree, cradled in nervous arms, and a whispered, "I think it'll grow better at your place." Elias had only nodded. Now, with the hole ready, he placed the sapling into the earth. He straightened its trunk, packed the soil around it firmly, and tapped in 2 wooden stakes on either side. Twine looped softly around the slender bark, giving it a frame to lean on, not holding it back. No fanfare. No one watched. No one needed to. That afternoon, the library's backyard buzzed with the quiet rustle of little bodies wriggling on picnic blankets and folding chairs. Marla adjusted a squeaky mic stand under the gazebo and left it off. Elias didn't ask for amplification. He took his place with hands tucked in his coat pockets. Boone curled behind him like a furry punctuation mark. The group of children squinted at him, unsure. The adults lingered near the building, pretending not to listen too hard. Elias eased a breath and began. "I want to tell you a story," he said, voice low but steady, "about a man who lived alone in a cabin. For a long time, he didn't speak to anyone, not because he couldn't, but because he thought no one wanted to hear what he had to say. The children stayed quiet, fidgeting only a little. He had a dog," Elias went on. "A good one, smart. That dog barked at things no one else noticed, listened when no one else did. And one day, the man started listening too. The children kept their questions to themselves. Just a little girl leaned over to stroke Boone's ear and murmured, 'I like Mr. Boone.' Elias blinked at that. Marla didn't say anything, but her smile crept in sideways. As the sky warmed to soft apricot near sunset, Elias headed back to the old shed. Boone trotted ahead, then paused beside the new sapling. Its leaves rustled gently in the breeze, unsure whether to tremble or stretch. Elias lowered himself beside Boone and placed his hand against the young trunk. The bark was thin, almost papery, but beneath it, he could feel it. Life moved. Subtle, pulsing, unhurried. His breath caught, not in tension, but release. It slipped out of him long and slow, carrying with it a weight he hadn't fully realized he'd still been holding. He lingered there for a while, simply listening. Around them, the woods whispered through layers of fallen leaves and mossy roots. The air carried a tangle of scents. Decaying oak, freshly turned soil, distant smoke from someone's chimney. And threaded through it all, something older, not sharp, not heavy, just present, like a memory that no longer demanded to be remembered, but didn't mind being felt. Boone shifted beside him, then stilled again. A ribbon fluttered at the top of the tree, a soft, worn piece of yellow fabric tied with care. Elias hadn't put it there. Maybe the wind had caught it from Boone's collar, or maybe someone else had passed through. Knowing no longer mattered. The leaves stirred overhead, not urgent, just alive, and beneath them, in quiet earth, the roots pressed downward, thin, reaching, steady. Sometimes healing doesn't come from revenge or even justice. It comes quietly, from planting something small, from being seen without fear, From choosing to stay, even after everything tells you to leave. Elias didn't erase his past. He made space for it to live beside him, and in that space, something new began to grow. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe for more tales where silence breaks, truth speaks, and even the loneliest roots can find soil.